This is Dead Serious, a show about short horror stories worthy of discussion. I'm Dead Palette, the ghostwriter for Broken Matt Hardy / the Brother Nero saga. That's right, blame me. Today we are taking a look at what is widely considered a classic among creepypasta enthusiasts, The Rake. We're going to see if it really does stack up as an independent story, or if it was just good in its context and revolutionary in its own right and maybe hasn't aged as well as we would hope. It's important to understand that when you're dealing with realist horror, it is something that is meant to be successful in its own time. And so sometimes that means that these stories just don't age well. That is a common symptom of creepypasta. You see the same thing in other mediums that do the same thing. So very narrative and journalistic even stories, mediums. So you have something like hip-hop. Sometimes these stories that are told in hip-hop just don't age well. And it's like, I don't see the value in Biggie Smalls anymore. It's like, well, you had to be there to kind of get what was going on. And same thing with wrestling. You watch old wrestling and it's like, wow, this is just two men in their underwear wrestling around for 20 minutes not doing anything. And it's like, yeah, but at the time it was kind of revolutionary. So let's get into the story, bearing in mind that maybe it hasn't aged well. Or maybe it has, let's get into it. During the summer of 2003, events in the northeastern United States involving a strange, human-like creature sparked brief local media interest before an apparent blackout was enacted. Little or no information was left intact, and most online and written accounts of the creature were mysteriously destroyed. So this is something that I think is heavily under-discussed about this story, which is, apparently, this creature, or something perhaps working on its behalf, enacted a media blackout? So this creature is widely considered to be Lovecraftian and everything. Spoiler, it's considered Lovecraftian. And so maybe this is supposed to be one of its abilities, that it just has the ability to make a media blackout, and so much so that it can even make stuff disappear from online. Well, whatever it is, it hasn't worked because everyone watching this video already knows what the Rake is, listening to it, whatever. Anyway, primarily focused in rural New York State and once found in Idaho, self-proclaimed witnesses told stories of their accounts with a creature of unknown origin. Emotions range from extremely traumatic levels of fright and discomfort to an almost childlike sense of playfulness and curiosity. While their published versions are no longer on record, the memories remained powerful. Several of the involved parties began looking for answers that year. So immediately, who is our narrator and who is the person compiling this information and who are these accounts? Who are the people who have these accounts? If their versions of these stories have disappeared from being online, why wouldn't they repost them? Presumably, some people actually saw these accounts, and maybe there would be some Streisand effect in effect. It just seems bizarre that we are being told of accounts secondhand when those people are apparently still interested in investigating this. You assume that these people who have these personal traumatic experiences would be able to tell you about these things again if they told us about them before, and they're still interested in them. It's just bizarre. Anyway, in early 2006, the collaboration had accumulated nearly 24 documents dating between the 12th century and present day, spanning 4 continents. In almost all cases, the stories were identical. I've been in contact with a member of this group and was able to get some excerpts from their upcoming book. Now, this is one of the things that usually kill stories, and I'm guilty of this. A lot of people are guilty of this. No book has forthwith come. What did I just say? There's no book about the Rake. And if there is, it's probably from some shady person stealing other people's stories. So did the Rake make this book disappear? Is that what we're left to assume? I hope that's what we're left to assume. But let's continue on. A suicide note, 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage any guilt or pain I have introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him. For once I awoke and felt his presence, and once I awoke and saw his form. Once again I awoke and heard his voice and looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what might happen next awake to experience. Of what I might next awake to experience. I can never wake. Goodbye. Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 loose personal letter with no envelope. Dearest Lenny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name. A journal entry translated from Spanish, 1880. I have experienced the greatest horror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierce me. His wet hand. I will not sleep. His voice. And then it descends into intelligible text. Unintelligible text. Intelligible text would be text that is intelligent, right? Okay, I'm being silly. So, right here, with a Spanish entry from 1880, I think is the real strength of this story, because it is someone who is having a Lovecraftian experience. They are going insane. It's very, Keeper's Diary from Resident Evil. It has very non-distinct yet descriptive characteristics. So you have the hollow eyes that are black. That's a good, vivid descriptor. You don't really hear eyes described as being hollow. But the word hollow has a lot of weight as being a scary thing. There's something beautiful about that phrasing. And the phrasing, his wet hand, that also is really strong. It's bizarre. It's hard to discern why his hand would be wet. Perhaps blood, but just the vagueness of a wet hand is unsettling. But let's press on. A Mariner's Log, 1691. He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again at the request of the Rake. So this is assuming that we have some sort of mind control ability our Rake does, which is bizarre. This again is a strength of the story in that it has it gives us these clues to interpret what the Rake can do and what its goals are. The ill-defined nature of it is sometimes its strength and sometimes its weakness. Here, it's a very bizarre phrasing and perhaps uncharacteristic of this mariner. Like, why would they want to turn back? So overall, I feel positive about this. If you feel differently, though, please leave a comment in the comment area. Please comment. From a Witness, 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used that moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologized and told him I thought he got out of bed. When he returned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up at the end of the bed so quickly his knees almost knocked me out of bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for half a second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man, or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked into a fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. So I don't know how to feel about the portrayal of the Rake as being a somewhat pitiful creature, as it is in this case. But what we are getting out of this, the clues that we have, are that the husband is frightened by this creature and is having that Lovecraftian reaction of looking at something as driving him insane and a terror and is freaking him out. But the wife in this scenario, our narrator in this part of the story, is having that childlike, curious reaction. That is interesting. I like that. I like that we are having two polar opposite reactions. Maybe it's a bit of a nitpick to say that they could have picked two different kinds of reactions than this, but overall, I like it. Moving on. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled across the side of the bed and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of motion right along the bed until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds, or probably closer to 5. It just seemed like a while, just looking at my husband. This is one of those things where if this was anything other than creepypasta, it would be garbage, but since it is creepypasta, it's good. The idea of like writing, oh, it was 30 seconds, or maybe it was 5, it seemed like a while, blah, blah, blah. That's really boring, generic, inane way of writing, but that's how people really write. People are annoying and vapid like that, and so that adds believability in this instance. I like that. The creature then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway leading to the kids' room. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the Rake." My husband drove his car into the lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. They did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the town next over who had a similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature we now refer to as the Rake. So again, we're getting more stuff reinforcing the idea that this thing has the ability to control the media somehow, which is just a bizarre effect that I don't know how to feel about it. Like, how would this creature have control over that? Does it just compel people to not do that? Maybe this is just the Rupert Murdoch of Lovecraftian characters where it can have media spin. It's so weird. I don't hate it. I've just always been fascinated by it, and so it's probably accomplishing its goal in that regard. But it seems like a weird thing for this creature to have control over. But pressing on. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the Rake. None of them gave any details, history, or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages and never mentioned it again. The ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were being told to leave by the Rake. That was the last entry log. So this is a part of the story that's confusing in that here in this paragraph, we are being led to believe that the person writing all of this and compiling all of this is the mother in this situation, the mother of Justin and the person, the mother who was the mother to Clara who died. but it continues being a quotation, so that's just bizarre to me. Anyway, I feel that this would be a stronger concept if it was written out as an ARG, as an alternate reality game in upon itself, because if we had these journal entries where it would just mention the rake and then stop mentioning the rake, and it would just be, or the rest of the entries in the journal would just be nothing to do with the rake at all, that is a realistic thing. But as it is here, we have all of this information compiled, but it's not an exhaustive list of all of these entries and all of this data that has been collected. So I think that the story either needs to be expanded in that regard or expanded into an ARG, which it has been by a number of people, to varying success rates. And people have very different opinions on how successful interpretations of the rake has been. There's a movie made by these guys about the rake. It's about 40 minutes, if I recall correctly. I enjoyed it. I think that it does a good way of... It has a nice explanation of how the rake is acting in nature. But pressing on. There were, however, many instances where the creature was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the rake had visited us before our last encounter. I set a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day when I woke up, but at the end of the second week, I was quite used to the occasional sound while blurring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. This still took an hour every day. On the first day of the third week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the rake. I can't listen to it long enough to begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and I now believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on the recording immediately brings me back to that moment. That's good writing there. I thought that must have gone through my daughter's head. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head made me very upset. There we go. I have not seen the rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room while I slept. I know in fear that one night I'll wake up to see him staring at me. So there is no good reason why audio couldn't be fabricated for this. And that's kind of puts a damper on the ending of the story, because why not have audio of the rake? Our narrator doesn't have a good excuse to not release it to us, and if there are people who analyze audio recordings and video and photographs and everything, thinking that they've seen and heard ghosts, why would this person not release this to us? It just seems bizarre. But anyway, maybe they're not releasing it because that's what the rake does, or is that a faulty excuse? I think that might be an okay excuse, but maybe it should be explained better. But anyway, at any rate, I think that this story has problems to it, that aspects of it haven't aged well, but overall, I think that this was a pretty decent entry into the world of realist horror. Let me know what you think below, and subscribe and like and do all of that shit, because I'm great and I deserve your attention and blah blah blah. This episode of Dead Serious was brought to you by a sponsor. Our sponsor was hooked up to us by the Lollet. This episode was brought to you by Dust Bunnies. Dust Bunnies, we've seen what you've done.